name is Shejini. I'm so happy to be with you today on this edition of Adult Sunday School. And this week we are going to be looking at a very interesting topic titled A King Acts on a Widow's Behalf. And our text will be drawn from 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 1 to 6 and 2 Kings chapter 4 verse 1 to 37. Now, we've been talking about justice all this while. Last Sunday, we looked at Solomon judges with wisdom. We actually saw how Solomon used God's wisdom to settle a dispute between two prostitutes. But this week, we're going to look at another aspect of wisdom, which has to do with having God's favor, justice being shown to you because you are favored by God. Now, when you study the book of 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 to 7, you will read a story about how a prophet from God by name Elisha was well treated by a Shunammite woman who was of course wealthy when Elisha visited Shunem. And so this lady treated Elisha very well. She welcomed Elijah in her home. She showed a lot of respect to Elijah, the man of God. But unfortunately, this lady didn't have a child. And so Elisha, being a miracle worker, had to pray with this lady, and this lady actually conceived and had a child. But not long, this child actually passed away. This child died. And this Shunammite woman had so much confidence in Elisha. So she actually went with her servant to look for Elisha. And when Elisha got news that this lady was coming, in fact, when she was coming with her servant, Elisha saw them coming. Elisha knew that there was something wrong. And so when this lady came and told Elisha that I just lost my son, Elisha, without wasting any time, came along with the lady and raised or restored the dead child to life. By the end of the lesson, these are the possible objectives you could state to help your students understand the lesson properly. One of the objectives could be that you should explain how God's justice led to the Shunammite woman having her land restored after her return from the lengthy absence. When she went to Philistine, she stayed there for quite some time. So when she came back, it wasn't possible for her to get all her properties restored to her. So we want to explain that story, how God's justice led to this Shunammite woman being favored by a king and having all her properties restored. Now, the second objective could be suggest ways God's justice may be at work today in restoration of those who have been internally displaced in our nation, especially our nation, Cameroon. So we are going to be using one of the key words is being displaced. What is the meaning of displaced? So according to this text, we want to look at how God's justice can be demonstrated towards people who have been displaced. And I want to use our context where people are internally displaced in Cameroon. Thirdly, your students should be able to identify some situations in which you can act as an agent or an instrument of God's justice towards people who are displaced. So these are the three objectives we are going to look at very briefly. Now, looking at the second text, which is the second part of our text, which is 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 1 to 6, you will observe that when this Shunammite woman actually came back from Philistines when the famine was over, all her property, her belongings, her land, she lost everything. And so she quickly ran to the king at the time to, state her case that, oh, I've lost everything. How can I regain everything that I have? Now, thankful enough, the king was with one of Elisha's servants called Gehazi. And Gehazi was aware, or he knew, this Shunammite woman, because at the time when Elisha performed the miracle to restore this woman's dead son to life, Gehazi was there at the time. So Gehazi was talking with the king, and what they were discussing actually had to do with the same Shunammite woman. Gehazi was explaining to the king how Elisha has restored Israel, how Elisha performed miracles, and was using the example of a Shunammite woman that Elisha raised from the son of a Shunammite woman that Elisha actually raised to life. And while they were discussing, this Shunammite woman appeared in appeared. She came into the scene, and what a surprise to Gehazi. Gehazi said, "Uh-huh, now this is the woman, and this is her son I was talking to you about." That was enough evidence to prove that Gehazi was speaking the truth and that Elisha was actually a man of God. Now, Elisha wasn't in the scene, but it was dramatic to learn that the same people that Gehazi was talking to the king about actually appeared in the scene. And so when this woman stated her case to the king immediately sent people to go and restore everything that she had and give it back to her. So there's this special divine connection for a woman who was displaced for a long period of time, and God made it in such a way that at the moment when she was coming to state her case, that is when Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, was stating her case indirectly, however, using her as an example. And today, that is how God acts in the lives of people. I just walked you out through the first objective, which had to do with explain how God's justice led to the Shunammite woman having her land restored. So, the lesson we can learn from here is that God has a plan for everybody. God has a plan for everybody, and his plans and his ways man cannot understand. The most important thing you can do is just to trust God and wait for his justice to prevail. If you are an internally displaced person, for instance, and you don't know what to do and you don't know how you're going to survive, trust God and hold on to God, because he will, just like the Shunammite woman, connect the dots and make situations happen in such a way that it is going to act on your favor or on your behalf. Now, the second objective has to do with suggest ways God's justice may be at work today in the restoration of assets to those who have been displaced. Now, one of the things I want you to understand is that God has ways in which he works that man cannot understand. So some people who have been displaced as a result of war, as a result of natural disasters, or things beyond their control, God always has a way to restore everything that they have lost. So what are some of the ways that God does this? Throw this question back to the class and let them suggest different ways in which God can restore the assets of those who have been displaced. It's not your job as a teacher to look for all these methods, but let the students discuss these methods amongst themselves in your class. And lastly, identify some situations in which you can act as an instrument of justice to an internally displaced person who is in need, or to internally displaced people who are in need. I've been using the word internally displaced, but actually in scripture we're talking about displaced people. The reason is because of the current situation that is happening in our nation. So it's very important for you to ask people that, let them suggest different ways in which they can help people who are internally displaced. This way, it will help our students to go back home knowing that they have learned something that will help people who are in need in our nation. So in a nutshell, this lesson has to do with justice, but it is focused on having divine favor from God. God using other people to help those who are in need. So at the end of the day, it is important that you should be someone that God can use as an instrument to bring peace, to bring joy, to bring happiness to someone who has been displaced. Thank you very much for listening. If you did enjoy this video, do not hesitate to subscribe in the button below, and you will get more updates of my programs and more updates on Sunday School Lessons. Thank you very much. Hope to see you in the next episode. My name is Shane.